Before I signed anything, I told the attorney I had something to say. The room got very quiet after that. My son-in-law was sitting across the conference table with a smile I'd seen before. It was the same smile he wore at my daughter's funeral 3 years ago. Practiced, patient, certain he'd already won. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Hutchinson, had a pen extended in my direction. All I had to do was sign the document in front of me and walk away. Give up the house my wife and I built in 1987. Give up the 43 acres her family had owned since before either of us were born. Give up roughly $340,000 in shared assets my daughter had spent her adult life accumulating. All of it gone. Because according to the trust amendment my son-in-law had produced, that was what my daughter wanted. Except she didn't, and I could prove it. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. Nothing impressive to look at, the kind you buy in a pack of 3 at the drugstore. But what was on it had taken me 14 months to find, and it changed everything. My son-in-law's smile didn't disappear immediately. It flickered, just slightly, like a candle in a draft. I'd like this review before anyone signs anything, I said. 48 hours earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Brenham, Texas, with a cup of coffee gone cold and a manila folder I'd read so many times the crease marks had started to tear. My daughter Sonia had died 22 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in the spring, gone by October. She was 41 years old. She had her mother's laugh and my stubbornness and a life she had built from scratch in ways that made me proud every single day. She also had a husband she'd been trying to leave. His name was Cade Whitmore. He was 44 years old, the kind of handsome that photographs well, and the kind of charming that makes people trust him before they should. He sold commercial real estate in Houston. He drove a white truck that was always clean. He called me sir for 11 years and never once meant it. Sonia told me things toward the end, not everything. She was protecting me the way she always did, the way she had done since she was 8 years old and her mother got sick the first time, and Sonia had decided the best thing she could do was make sure I didn't fall apart. But she told me enough. She told me the marriage had been a mistake for a long time. She told me she had started talking to a lawyer. She told me that whatever happened, she wanted the land to stay in the family. Her grandmother's land. The land she used to walk with me on Sunday mornings, when she was small enough that I could carry her on my shoulders through the back pasture. That land stays with us, Daddy, she said. Don't let anyone take it. She died 6 weeks later. The original will left everything split between 2 parties, me and a charitable foundation Sonia had started in her mother's name. The land and the house on it went to me outright. Clear, simple, notarized, witnessed properly. I had a copy. Her attorney had a copy. Then, 4 months after her death, Cade produced a trust amendment. Signed, he said, 2 weeks before she died. It redirected the property and a substantial portion of her liquid assets to him. The foundation received nothing. I received a small personal bequest, her grandmother's quilt, some photographs, a set of cast-iron cookware. Everything else went to the man she had been trying to leave. I didn't believe it for 1 second. But believing something and proving it are 2 very different problems, and Cade's lawyer was better than mine. The amendment was notarized. The signatures matched, at least at first look. My attorney, an older man in Brenham who handled mostly cattle contracts and deed transfers, told me I could contest it, but that it would be expensive, slow, and hard to win. He said sometimes people change their minds at the end. He said it gently, the way people do when they think you're too old or too grieved to handle the direct version. I told him I understood, and then I hired someone else. Her name was Darlene Pruitt. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a forensic document examiner out of San Antonio, 67 years old, retired from the state crime lab, and the most precise human being I have ever encountered. She charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent. I paid for her out of the savings account I'd been building since 1994. I didn't tell anyone, not my son, not my sister, not my neighbor who brought casseroles and asked too many questions. I just wrote the check and waited. It took her 4 months. What she found was this: the trust amendment had been signed. Sonia's signature was real, but the date on the document had been altered. Not crudely. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. But Darlene knew more than they did. Ink analysis, paper compression testing, something involving laser examination that she explained to me twice, and I only halfway understood. The document had been signed months before the date it claimed, before Sonia was even diagnosed, before the will had been finalized. The amendment, as written, was legally void. There was more. Darlene had contacts. She made calls. She found a notary in Katy, Texas, who had stamped the document, a young woman who, when approached carefully and privately, admitted she had notarized it as a favor for a colleague. She had not been present when Sonia signed. She had not confirmed identity. She had not followed a single required procedure. She was 26 years old and frightened, and she had not understood what she was agreeing to do. She was willing to provide a sworn statement. "I'm sorry," Darlene said when she called me with the final summary. "I know this is hard to hear in a different way than you expected. This wasn't your daughter changing her mind. This was done to her." I sat with that for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the cedar waxwings were going through the pyracantha bush like they did every November. My wife used to watch them from this window. Sonia used to watch them with her. I watched them alone and thought about what my daughter had tried to protect and what had been taken from her while she was dying and what I was going to do about it. I had 14 months of patience left in me. I used every bit of it. Let me back up and tell you who I am because it matters for this story. My name is Alton Briggs. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working for the Texas Department of Transportation, mostly road planning, some bridge inspection. I retired 4 years ago. My wife, June, died of a stroke in 2019. Sonia was our only child. I live on 12 acres outside of Brenham in a house I built the addition on myself in 2001. I grow tomatoes badly and pecans reasonably well. I go to the same church I've attended since 1986. I am not a dramatic man. I don't raise my voice often. I don't make threats. I don't tell people things I'm not prepared to back up. I met Cade for the first time at Thanksgiving 2011. Sonia brought him home and he spent the whole weekend being impressive. He knew football. He knew wine. He helped me carry firewood without being asked. He looked me in the eye when he talked to me. I thought he was decent. I told June that night that he seemed like the real thing. June didn't say much. She had a way of watching people that was quieter than mine. Afterward, she said she hoped I was right. That was all. I thought about that a lot after everything fell apart. June had seen something. She always did. They got married in 2013, a big outdoor wedding on the property that Sonia had been planning for 2 years. Cade's family came from Midland, his parents, a brother, some cousins. They were polite and a little distant, the way some families are when they think their son married down, even though the acreage and the history and the woman herself told a different story. I danced with Sonia to a song she picked out herself, something old and slow, and she put her head on my shoulder, the same way she had at her mother's first hospitalization, the same way she had at her prom, the same way she had at her prom, the same way she had since she was 4 years old, and I thought, whatever happens, she's gonna be all right. I was her father. It was my job to believe that. The first year seemed fine. They bought a house in the Heights in Houston. She kept her job at the nonprofit she'd worked at for 8 years, environmental land trust work, the kind of job she loved because it meant something. He did well with commercial real estate, the kind of well that meant they took good trips and had a nice car, and Sonia sent me pictures of restaurants that charged more for a steak than I paid for a week of groceries. I didn't see any trouble. She didn't show me any. But she talked to her friend Marcy. And Marcy, after Sonia died, after Cade had started his legal maneuvering with the estate, after she saw what was happening, Marcy called me. "I want to tell you something," she said, "because Sonia would want you to know." She told me that Sonia had been unhappy for years, that Cade had a habit of control that didn't leave bruises, financial control, social control, the kind that isolates a person so slowly they don't realize how alone they are until they're completely surrounded. Sonia had talked to a divorce attorney twice, once in 2018 and once in the spring of 2021, just before her diagnosis. Both times she pulled back. The second time she told Marcy she was scared about what he would do with the property. The land, her grandmother's land. She was protecting it, Marcy said. Even before she knew she was sick, she was already worried about what he would go after. When she got sick, she updated her will. She made her intentions clear. She thought that was enough. It wasn't enough, because Cade had spent 11 years learning exactly how to operate in the margins where things were hard to see. But here is what he didn't account for. I had nothing but time. I was 62 years old, retired, and the only person in the world whose entire purpose was making sure my daughter's last wishes were honored. He thought grief had finished me. He was wrong. Grief had made me methodical in a way I had never been before. Every morning I got up, I worked, I took notes, I kept records, I made calls, I waited, I let him think the old man had accepted it and moved on. I waited 14 months. The mediation session had been Cade's idea, which told me something. A man with a clean case doesn't push for settlement. A man with a clean case lets the process work. He wanted this resolved quickly and quietly, and that meant he was afraid of what Slow and Loud might find. He sat across the table in a conference room in Austin, his lawyer beside him, a plate of cookies in the center of the table that no one touched. I came with my new attorney, a woman named Ingram who did estate litigation and had a reputation for not losing. I'd paid for her the same way I'd paid for Darlene. Steadily, carefully, from the account June and I had built over 30 years for exactly the kind of situation we hoped we'd never need. He thought we were there to negotiate a settlement. He had a number in mind. I could see it in the way he positioned himself, comfortable, already calculating. I didn't give him the chance. Before I signed anything, I told the attorney I had something to say, and I placed the flash drive on the table. On it was Darlene's full report, the notary's sworn statement, bank records my attorney had subpoenaed showing Cade had accessed Sonia's personal account twice in the week after she signed the original will. Not the amendment, the original, accessing records he had no legal right to. Emails between Cade and a contact I'll call his associate, sent 8 months before Sonia died, discussing the property transfer in terms that presupposed the outcome, planning it. Weeks before her diagnosis, months before the document that claimed to reflect her final wishes, Cade's lawyer read the first page of Darlene's report and asked for a recess. I said we'd take 15 minutes. When we reconvened, the number he'd had in mind had been replaced by a different posture entirely. His lawyer did most of the talking now. There were words like cooperation and resolution and best interests. There was a suggestion that perhaps certain records had been misfiled, that there may have been a misunderstanding about the timeline. I looked at Cade while his lawyer spoke. He was staring at the flash drive the way you stare at something that has ended your plans. I had seen that expression once before on a contractor who had told me a bridge joint was sound when it wasn't. The expression of a man who has been found out and is now calculating damage rather than defending innocence. I let Ingram handle the legal language. That was what I was paying her for. What I got in the end was this. The trust amendment was withdrawn. The original will was reinstated. The land came back to me. Sonia's foundation received the assets she had designated for it. Cade received nothing beyond what the original will specified, which was a small personal bequest, some furniture from the Houston house, a watch of his that had been in the estate inventory. He also received a referral to the district attorney's office for document fraud. I don't know what will come of that. Legal processes take time, especially when the person on the other end has resources and connections, but the referral was made. The notary's statement is on record. Darlene's report is on file. Whatever happens next is out of my hands, and I have made my peace with that. What I have not made peace with, and may never, is sitting in that room while his lawyer talked about misunderstandings, and I thought about Sonia in her hospital bed in October, thin in a way she'd never been, holding my hand and telling me to make sure the land stayed in the family. She should have been spending that energy on something else. She should have been resting. She should not have had to spend her last weeks worried about what a man she had been trying to leave would do to what she was leaving behind. That is the part that stays with me. Not the documents, not the legal process, not even the outcome. The image of my daughter using her last good days to protect what she loved because she knew who she had married and she knew what he was capable of and she didn't want him to win. He didn't win. I drove back to Brenham after the mediation. It was early December, the kind of cold that isn't brutal but means business, and the light was already going by 4 o'clock. I stopped at the gate to the property and just sat there for a minute with the engine running. 43 acres. Some of it pasture, some of it old hardwood, a creek in the back that runs clear most of the year. Sonia's grandmother had walked that land. Her mother had walked it. Sonia had walked it. Last spring, I found one of her hair ties caught in the fence wire near the east gate, and I left it there. Still there now. The land is mine on paper, but it belongs to all of them. I called Marcy that night, told her what had happened. She cried, which made me cry, which I hadn't done in a while and probably needed to do. She said Sonia would be relieved. I said I thought so too. We talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with estates or fraud or mediation. Sonia's ridiculous ability to burn toast no matter what toaster she used, the way she'd always called me the Sunday before Thanksgiving to compare pecan pie strategies. The trip the three of us had taken to Big Bend in 2015, when Sonia's car had blown a tire and we'd waited 3 hours on the side of the road, and somehow it had become one of the best days any of us could remember. She was real. All of her was real. The laugh and the stubbornness and the hair tie on the fence wire, none of it was a lie. That's the thing I hold on to when the grief gets heavy. The life she lived was genuine. The love she gave was genuine. What was false was what was done to her, and that is Cade's to carry. Not mine, not hers. My son is Sonia's half-brother from my first marriage, a man named Trent who lives in Nashville and came down for the mediation even though I told him he didn't have to. Called me that night after I'd spoken to Marcy. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was okay. He said I didn't have to be okay. I told him I knew that. I told him I'd had 14 months of not being okay and that I'd gotten through it by staying busy and staying focused and reminding myself every morning that the point wasn't to punish Cade. The point was to honor Sonia. That's what it always was. From the first phone call to Darlene to the last signature in that conference room. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was just refusing to let her wishes be erased by someone who had spent 11 years learning how to erase things quietly. She deserved better than that. She got better than that. The foundation is operating now. It does land conservation work in Central Texas, which is exactly what Sonia would have wanted. They've already helped 3 small landowners establish conservation easements. I went to their first board meeting in February and sat in the back and said nothing the entire time and drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. I don't have a clean word for it. Something between proud and heartbroken and grateful, all at once. I plant tomatoes every year. I grow them badly every year. June used to say the problem was I got impatient and watered them too much. Sonia used to say the problem was the soil, and she'd bring me bags of amendment from a nursery in Houston every spring. Last year I didn't have either of them to give me advice, so I tried to remember everything they told me, and I did a little better. Not great, but better. That's how most things go, I think. You lose people. You carry what they taught you. You do a little better than you would have without them, even when better still isn't very good. I'm 63 years old. I have 12 acres and a creek and a fence wire with a hair tie on it that I will not remove. I have a son in Nashville who calls more than he used to. I have a foundation operating in my daughter's name. I have a flash drive in my desk drawer that I will keep for the rest of my life. And I have the land. Sonia asked me to hold on to it, so I did. If you're watching this and you're somewhere in the middle of something like this, fighting for someone who's already gone, trying to protect what they left behind, wondering if you have enough time or money or energy to keep going, I want to tell you something. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to move fast. You don't have to convince anyone right now. What you have to do is stay in it. Keep records. Ask questions. Find the person who knows the thing you don't know yet. And don't let anyone tell you that moving on means letting go of the truth. Moving on and letting go are not the same thing, not even close. I moved on. Sonia is still gone. The land is still here. And the truth won, eventually, the way it usually does when someone decides to be patient enough to wait for it. That's all I've got. Go call someone you love if you can, and take care of yourselves out there. I keep that flash drive in my desk drawer. Haven't moved it since the day I set it down on that conference table and watched 14 months of quiet, patient work do what anger never could have. People have asked me how I stayed calm through all of it. Honestly, I don't think I was calm. I think I was just focused. There's a difference. Calm suggests you're not feeling anything. I was feeling everything. The grief, the fury, the disbelief that someone could look at a dying woman's final months and see an opportunity. What I chose to do was put all of that somewhere. It couldn't waste itself. I wrote it into notes. I put it into records. I directed it toward the one thing that actually mattered, finding the truth and making sure it held. That's what I'd call the first thing this whole experience taught me about how to be a decent human being. Cade operated on the assumption that what he was doing was invisible, that if no one could see it, it wasn't really wrong. That's not how it works. The choices we make when no one is watching are exactly the measure of who we are. He forged a timeline. He exploited a notary who didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. He moved quietly around a grieving family and assumed grief would do the rest. Every one of those decisions had a weight to it, and eventually that weight showed up in a conference room in Austin and sat across the table from him. The second thing I learned is that knowledge matters more than fury. When I first understood what had happened to Sonia's estate, my instinct was to call a lawyer and start making noise. What I did instead was find Darlene Pruitt and start asking questions. Ink dating? Paper compression? Notarial procedure? I didn't know any of that before. I learned it because I had to, because the situation required me to think past my own outrage and figure out what would actually work. Intelligence isn't something you either have or don't. It's something you apply, carefully, toward a specific problem, for as long as it takes. 14 months is a long time to stay precise. But precision was the only thing that was going to get Sonia's land back where it belonged. And the third thing, the hardest one, is that you have to keep going when there's no visible sign that keeping going is working. There were months in there where I had nothing. where Darlene was still running tests and the legal process was stalled, and I was just a 62-year-old man eating cold coffee and rereading the same documents. Nobody saw any of that. Nobody was going to give me credit for getting up every morning and continuing. I had to do it for a reason that existed entirely inside myself, because Sonia asked me to hold on to it, and I was not going to be the reason that didn't happen. Those three things: doing right when it's invisible, thinking clearly when you're in pain, and holding on past the point where holding on feels reasonable. They don't guarantee any particular outcome. Life doesn't work that way, but they gave me the best possible chance. And in the end, the land is here. The foundation is running. The hair tie is still on the fence wire. That's enough for me.